Good afternoon and welcome everyone to our webinar this afternoon. We're very happy to have Jeremy Pollard with us. How often have we received a bid request that has been thrown over the wall and then we can't get the right engagement from our colleagues in sales? A question often comes up: who should own the exec summary and who actually ends up writing it? So these are all challenges that we all face in our day-to-day work. And the theme of the topic here today is, the theme of the talk today is about bridging that gap between sales and pre-sales. Please post your questions on the text message. My team would take your questions and we'll interrupt Jeremy, and Jeremy will answer the questions as we go along. Jeremy Pollard is a partner from Shipley Asia Pacific, and he is based out of Sydney. And he will share his insights on how to bridge the gap between sales and pre-sales. Jeremy has helped many organizations fix this very issue. Jeremy, we appreciate your time. I know it's late in the evening, your time, and to share your insight with us. Ladies and gentlemen, Jeremy Pollard. Floor is yours, Jeremy.
Thank you, Stan. Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us here on the big global Shipley collective. Talk about a topic that I have seen impact many people over many decades, and the key word in our title today is this idea of a bridge. As organizations get bigger, there is a need to specialize labor and the division of labor and the functions. Of course, what happens when people get working in particular functions is that there can be a tendency, unless the process has been designed well, to create silos between the functions, and the possible silos in your organization between sales and pre-sales, bid and proposal teams, and there's another group, the subject matter experts, the solution experts, that also need to be considered. Coordinated and effective activity between these different groups in your organization. Once you get in a certain size, that specialization will cause these groups to be necessary, but it's also necessary to have a process that has them working well together, and that's the subject of our talk today. I'll share my screen now, and we'll go to this first screen here, which includes two things. On the right is the white paper that we wrote about 18 months ago, and the table of contents of this was what is the agenda for our talk tonight. And a copy of that white paper, which I shall be talking about with you and we'll be discussing, has been provided in the chat window and can be distributed to you later. On the left-hand side is an Excel spreadsheet which includes a lot of your questions and topics when you registered for the webinar. And what you'll see here together as we look at this screen is, and this is a mixture of people, pre-sales, sales, and bid and proposal people have contributed these topics. How to build effective relationship with the sales team, how they can work inclusively and effectively, response prep and pre-sales activities, winning strategies. Someone has put a lovely comment here: magic tips to bridge the gap. I'm sorry to let you down, but I'll do it gently. There's no magic. It's common sense and discipline and work. But then most things in life tend to have those qualities. But I like the idea that there is a magic wand we could wave to fix all this. Be aligned with sales and think like a sales leader during the selling cycle. Great question or great observation, because what bridging this gap does require is that both parties, if you like, both groups, those of us in sales and those of us in the proposal side, we do need to understand each other's pressures and challenges and objectives in order to work together as harmoniously as can be possible. But I like that idea, be aligned and think like a sales leader. That's a form of customer focus, which is a Shipley principle, but it also applies in these process steps as well. How to make proposals more appealing is actually a really interesting outcome of bridging this gap, and we'll dive into that. How to run proposal discussions. We'll talk about some of the principles that are involved in working together better. How to work collaboratively, coordinate and execute an effective bid. That's absolutely what this is about. So a lot of questions or a lot of desire to synchronize, coordinate, work together more effectively. So what I will be doing is sharing a couple of slides that have been produced from the white paper. So you'll get the white paper. These slides are out of actually out of a training workshop that we run for customers' leadership teams. So a couple of comments. The slides are discussion prompts. So they're not the answer, but they're an opportunity for you to think about and question yourself and your team and your colleagues around these topics. So it's for people who understand that sales training alone is not always the answer. You know, my background is 40+ years in sales, of course, always working on bids and proposals, but I'm not a writer per se, although I've managed a lot of bids. So the sales training doesn't always change the win results over here on this side. So it's a document for people who want to better understand why sales training alone isn't going to make a difference, how to bridge the gap, and looking to plan a path to educate and involve key stakeholders in the building of your bridge. It is not something that any of us in either silo can do on our own. We need to bring this topic up and get the leadership team involved with it, and the leadership team understanding and collaborating and supporting a program to kind of bridge this gap. So these slides are usually presented to senior business people who are wanting to fix the process. I'm sharing them with you so that you can see the ideas that are sometimes helpful to be discussing, acknowledging that all of your organizations will be different and have different drivers. So what is the selling and bidding gap? Most organizations have invested in sales process and training for BD teams, and they keep being surprised at losing key accounts at contract rebid or failing to win new business against lesser competitors. You know, why did we lose to them? They're not very good. We're better than they are. That's usually a sign of that sales to bid gap. So when we do audits of client process, we normally find these gaps between selling and bidding, and they lack what's needed for win strategy that takes the actions of sales and makes sure that it turns up in the document the customer sees. So if you think about the gap, it's at its highest level, a gap between the conversation sales have with customers and what the customer is expecting and what turns up in the document that they receive. So the material we're going to go through is we'll introduce steps to improve win rates by bridging those gaps. So, and this visual is included in the white paper, but it's essentially the BD capability maturity model, the BDCMM, the Business Institute Capability Maturity Model for business development, and Matt Donnett are the steps between the BD life cycle towards the top half, sales across the middle, and the bidding group across the bottom. And each of the crosses are places where this gap exists and the problems that are typical. Firstly, if you're looking for the existence of the gap, the first thing that you're likely to find is a gap between any link between the opportunity plan and for the opportunity and the proposal capture strategy. Second thing, there is no executive summary for early written assumption and solutions testing. Sam asked the question, who should own the executive summary? Well, the opportunity owner, ideally, it is not something that tell a writer, oh, write me an executive summary, because of course they have to know about the customer, about your strategy, and it's your job as the opportunity owner to draft, not necessarily finish off, but the early drafts of the executive summary we'll look at shortly, how you test assumptions and test ideas about the solution with the customer. If you can't put that in writing, and an executive summary is a blanket or an overall name for a document that does that, then you've got a gap between selling and bidding. Another area where, there's the third X, red X on the chart there, is that an organisation will struggle to leverage customer feedback into the proposal planning. In other words, it's done in a rush, it's done at the end, here's the tender document, just write something, tell them about how good we are and answer the questions technically. But done well, where there is no gap, there's an opportunity to actually get feedback from the customer, test those assumptions and incorporate it into the proposal. So another symptom that you may see is this third one. The fourth one, there's undermining of the initial sales intent with misaligned solution or bid presentations. In other words, what the customer thought they were going to get isn't what comes back in solution or proposal presentations or the solution itself. Another thing that we often see is a weakened negotiation position around the contract. If you find once the proposal's gone in, you get into kind of a bit of negotiating around your offer and the contract and the terms and conditions, and you're feeling as though you've got a weakened negotiation position around the contract, that's often a symptom that there's been a gap there as well. And the last area, and although this has nothing to do with, writing proposals, but looking at the BD life cycle in its entirety, if you have some projects where there is misalignment around delivery expectations, there are always problems, the contract is always being pulled out, that is usually a symptom of a selling and bidding gap. It's a set of problems or consequences that arrive because of these other red X's on the plan. Now, the good news is if you bridge this gap, which is what we're talking about now, you can save time and money by getting the right content from the sales opportunity plans. You build a lot of customer confidence and trust with these iterative draft written executive summaries. The customer gets involved in that process and there's some ownership, mutual ownership in the document. You improve customer focus by showing that you can adapt more quickly and update your proposal quickly on the back of feedback that they give you. You also have an opportunity to reduce negotiation value leakage by establishing value with the customer much earlier, and that's a pretty powerful thing. We've also got evidence of contract variations and disputes drop off by encouraging and supporting clearer communication all the way through this process. So there's some really significant benefits to bridging this gap. Now, what are the 5 steps? Number one, improve business development role clarity with an open BD standard, and we'd suggest the BD Institute is probably the safest place to start. Number two, unlock the value in your sales training by getting tools that bridge the data and collection gaps and avoid something we call data bloat. One of the things that we see is that not all, but many sales processes and the forms to fill out and the tables to populate collect an awful lot of data that is actually unusable, almost to the point of being unhelpful, in drafting a winning proposal. And our argument is maybe we don't need so much of that information. So the other idea in this, unlocking the value in any of the sales training that's taken place, is to maximise the use and reuse of those tools, make them more shareable and scalable, and have what's captured in sales more easily able to be picked up, and the value in them used by bid and proposal people. Better competitive positioning. You've got to have a proposal win strategy, and an awful lot of the proposals that we look at where people have not been successful, we ask to see the win strategy. They look at us like, well, we told them how good we are. Isn't that a win strategy? And sadly, the answer is no. The other thing, I don't know how many of you ever have this as a kind of a thing that would be handy to do. You can progress your deals more quickly. I don't know if you've ever had deals slow down, get held up, not move as fast as you'd like, by the iterative assumptions testing using draft executive summaries. Last thing that's a key step, reduce solution and cost risks by co-developing your solution strategy with the customer where possible. Now, in a short webinar, we can't go into the full detail of every one of these, but we'll take a look at each one quickly to make sure that you at least understand where you could begin talking with your colleagues about. The first one here, define roles to an open standard. You can get from the Shipley team there. Any of the Shipley officers will be able to get you hold of the copies of the capability maturity model for business development, and define all of your win work roles, not just sales, against an independent framework for business development. There's an awful lot of people trying to fix problems by changing the organisation chart. The organisation chart itself is not necessarily the issue, but it's a lack of clarity. We began at the beginning of this discussion talking about the need for specialisation, division of labour, but you have to make sure everyone's clear about what their role is. So there's usually going to be challenges or gaps in role definition that can be improved a little bit. Define all of them, not just the sales role. So make sure that at all of these stages through the BD life cycle, particularly for the folks involved in bidding, to Sam's question earlier, who is responsible for the final executive summary, the draft executive summary, the editing of the executive summary? They're outcomes that you want the process to deliver, but you would not expect a writer to produce the draft. You would not expect a BD person to produce a finished or polished written version of that. So you need to get some clarity about who is going to do what. A lot of time and energy gets wasted through a lack of role clarity. It's important to unlock the value in sales training. Most big organisations have spent a lot of money training the sales team, the business development team, the pursuit leads, the capture leads. And there's a lot of information and a lot of energy around account plans, opportunity plans, all the call plans. But getting that information out and being able to use it in better proposals, it will take some work. And that's what the bridge is about. So this idea of co-developing the hot buttons and the bidder comparison matrix and the win strategy and aligning your solution to the customer hot buttons Interestingly, an awful lot of the sales processes don't always identify what the customer's overall organisational critical success factors for the project are, and a lot of the training that we get as salespeople is very much about how to have good conversations, but there's very little in it about how to validate or confirm what was discussed back in writing to the customer. And the idea of these draft executive summaries to do that is really important. So account plans, just very quickly, they often have an awful lot of important information. We're not saying they aren't important, but account plans in general rarely contain information that's useful for bid and proposal strategy at the opportunity level. So with the bridging between sales and bidding does not happen at the account level. It happens down at the opportunity level, because you don't write a proposal at the account level, you write proposals about specific opportunities. So a lot of that information is useful background, but where you need to start building the foundations of your bridge is when we get down to opportunity plans as opposed to general account plans. Now, the challenge is thinking about what aspects of the opportunity plan are necessary for the subsequent proposal. And that's a process that many of us have not considered going through or put the effort into. Here's an example of a typical opportunity plan. Here's 11 fields where data is collected. This is from a methodology a lot of our customers use. The second column talks about the degree to which there is any leverage in the proposal strategy from that opportunity plan data. And as you will see, opportunity details will low, single sales objective low, buying influences high leverage, the competitive information high leverage. But an awful lot of the other information, base coverage, position today, actions possible and best, low or medium leverage or relevance in the win strategy. So this is an example of the sort of the mapping that's handy to do. If as salespeople we're all going out and collecting all of this information, it's important to think about what of that is actually going to be of value, not just to us, but to the customer in the actual proposal. And sometimes a lot of the sales information is a bit too introspective. It's too inward focusing on us and the customer, and there's not enough about what they're actually going to need in the proposal to make a decision. And that's what win rates are all about. So you just want the data needed to win the bid or propose. So here we would use this is out of a customer recommendation, buying influences, competitive information, which is input to the Shipley bidder comparison matrix, key win results is input to people and issues, the actions that need to be taken are a good start to solution selling, and they're a basis of building effective win strategy. And information needed is kind of a lot of the assumption sets to have. So this is an example, but it's important that you focus on making sure you understand what win strategy is necessary, what in your opportunity plans actually has to be developed for that. So mapping your sales content to your bidding needs, you need the customer's hot buttons, you need to be able to populate a bidder comparison chart or matrix, and you need a win strategy. You need to align the solution to the hot buttons so you can identify solution gaps and any mitigations that are necessary, and all the way through that process with the customer be testing all these assumptions with draft executive summaries. Call plans are a critical part of selling and business development. What a lot of the sales training organisations share with us is that they're often not used or not used well. And we're not here to tell people how they should run their call planning, but there are aspects of a Shipley capture plan that can really help strategic sales call management. And so the Shipley bid and proposal win strategy is important and is most effective where you need oral and written communication of the goals and plans that you have and the customer's trying to achieve, supported by these progressive drafts. And the act of putting this in writing to the customer and engaging with them around these topics in a written form helps the customer socialize and share and build support for these ideas or test them. But they also build your competitive position where if you're doing that and your competitors are not, this actually becomes a competitive advantage. So the sales bid bridge is made up of this key information for win strategy, building mitigations around solution, and that iterative testing. So the competitive positioning that we talked about here, this need for that, comes out of a tool, just a simple Shipley strategy spreadsheet, which includes the hot buttons, bit of comparison matrix, and your win strategy. And you get that in just standard capture training. The key thing is to understand that in proposal management training, so if in your capture process you're collecting that, we try and make it easy for to pass that over to the bid or proposal people so they can more quickly get traction in developing documents with it. The executive summaries we talked about before, and the key thing, back to Sam's question, no one person owns it, although as an opportunity owner, I would say that that's my most powerful sales tool, is the draft executive summary shared with the customer. And my job is to come up with the strategy, put it into the executive summary organizer, and then have a good writer do the draft. But understand planning it and organizing it and drafting it are not the same. And that's the most marvelous example of where the sales process and the bid process can get together at such an important level. But as the opportunity owner, it's my job to have that strategy, organize the thoughts, the logic of the argument. But I'm not a writer. I can plan and strategize and organize the ideas, but I need the bid and proposal people, the writers, to actually turn that into a good draft, well-written draft that I can take back and share with the customer. And then the feedback from the customer, we come back and we update it, we revise it, we take it back, we share it again. So Sam, back to your question, there's a good process, best practice, multiple owners, but the right people in the right parts of it. So aligning your solution strategy per opportunity, excuse me. There's a very, very simple tool that's part of this called the integrated solution worksheet, which is part of the standard capture training. But it essentially just helps you make sure you understand how your solution is seen relative to your competition, not through the eyes of your solution team, your subject matter expert, through the eyes of your customer. And that's a job for both the capture team and the proposal team to collaborate on together with the solution team. And that's the other aspect of this bridge that's so important. So it's a very simple summary table. It's not super hard to use, but the conversations it'll provoke are challenging. And then aligning all of this is really just comes back to your own execution. But if you think about the different silos or groups or stakeholders that we've talked about in this brief introduction to it, between sales, the solution team, the subject matter experts, and your proposal people, you have to get the roles right. You have to agree on what the right information to be passing over is. you have to have a lot of customer focus involved in that. And the key tool, if you only do one thing, get into this idea of draft executive summaries and start sharing them early with customers. The beauty of it is when you invite and involve your bid or proposal folk in the drafting of your strategy and organized ideas, the logic in your argument as a salesperson. When I get a writer working with me to do that and I share it with the customer and I come back and I sit down with that writer and say, okay, here's the feedback. This is what I think needs to change. I'm not having to be the world's best writer to do that. And the writer isn't having to do my job and come up with the strategy. So if you want to build the first rope across the gap, start with the executive summary being that little modest bridge between the two parts of the process, and you can build out onto some of the other sort of tools and steps later as well. So that's the starter. The white paper gives you more details. The first question here that I see is, how do you win against a competitor with a better past performance than yours, not necessarily an incumbent? Here's how the process we've described will help you with that, because it's a great question. If you've shown greater customer focus during the process working with this client, that can make a big difference in terms of showing your understanding of the situation can be as powerful as having provided the same solution a lot before. What you can learn in that iterative customer focused capture process can get you past not having as much experience. Your win strategy, which the Shipley chain can kind of take you through, will show where the customer thinks you're ahead or doing okay and where you're behind, and then apply some creative thinking to the messages and the stories to make up those gaps. Capture's about improving your position. The other secret to that topic, that aspect, is just you have to start early. You can't do this at tender time.
So asking, what is the risk benefit of sharing your strategy exec summary with a customer during the sales cycle, not knowing it will be shared with your competitor? Well, a lot of times what we don't want to do is give any pricing or commercially sensitive things. But if you look at hot buttons and identify the hot buttons, Jeremy, I was just standing in for you. This is the question of what's the risk benefit of sharing your strategy exec summary with a customer during the sales cycle, not knowing it'll be shared with your competitor. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. And the it's an understandable concern, and what we'd suggest is that if you find a customer who's prepared to have a conversation with you early, and you write some notes about your meeting and discussion, and you share that back with them, and you mark it as commercial in confidence, if they are working a lot with another company who is ahead of you in the cycle, and they do happen to share those insights with another company, with your competitor, all you
Jeremy, you may want to switch your video off.
Yep. Yeah, we're on a satellite connection here, and occasionally it drops out of it. So you're not sharing commercial and confidence information. You're not sharing technical details of your solution or pricing. It's a dance. It's an interaction to and fro back with the customer. If they won't participate in that with you, then there's a very high chance that they're probably not going to give you the work, and they're just getting a bid out of you, a price out of you, to keep an incumbent honest. And so that relates a little bit to Tim's question about, bidding to public sector. The procurement process, once that's kicked off, if I'm in a government department and I want to organise a supply of some goods or services, you need to get to me before I hand over my requirements to procurement. Now, that said, executive summaries are very, very powerful, even in responding to tenders, but they're more powerful if you've had a chance to draft them and build up the argument and the quality of them in the pre-tender phase. Generally, the reasons that people asking for a tender response put page limits on them is because they've had too many tenders that were just full of really unhelpful information. So use iterative draft executive summaries pre-tender to tighten up your focus and your messaging. Would be our suggestion. Sam, is that I mean, how consistent is that with your experience?
That is very good, thank you. And in fact, what we suggest is write the exec summary as a standalone document, as a white paper, as a briefing paper, not as a summary of your solution. And what that happens is when you are in the tender process and you submit your tender documents, then a briefing paper can be submitted, and then you actually are using it as part of the procurement process, but focus it around the hot buttons of the key decision makers so that it is a briefing paper and not a summary of your solution. Now,